G'day. F1 is a dog-eat-dog world, but occasionally there are moments that warm your heart. Moments like these. The first respectful moment I'll dwell on is Sebastian Vettel and Charles Leclerc in Bahrain 2019. You might remember that Charles took his first ever pole position, pipping Sebastian Vettel. Looked set to win the race too until 10 laps before the end of the Grand Prix, when an issue with Ferrari's engine forced him to concede the lead, a lead that he'd held for the majority of the race, to Lewis Hamilton. Yes, he ended up third, but he was gutted after that loss, and the first person to approach him in Parc Fermé was this man, his teammate, technically his closest rival. But Seb was quick to console the young driver, and that was something that didn't go unnoticed by many. Next up we go to Silverstone 2022, and Zhou Guanyu's crash at turn 1 was a monster. George Russell was involved in that crash. He was one of the 3 cars that came together before turn 1, and he was very quick to stop his car on track and ended up walking through the gravel, stood on the tyres to make sure Zhou was all right. It surprised the hell out of me to see him standing on those tyres, and I can tell you that the marshals at the time thought it was a doctor. To thank those marshals who were instrumental in getting Zhou out of that car, George actually invited a number of them to come for a factory tour as his guests. Despite what you think of George as a racer, this was indeed a respectful moment. At this point, let me remind you that Jack Doohan, who is the 19th Australian to drive in Formula 1, will be signing copies of this magnificent print taken from the Australian Grand Prix weekend in Japan and numbering each one of them. If you want to get one of those on your wall, head straight away to the shop at kimelman.com or click in the link below. Next up, a man who's no longer racing in Formula 1, and I don't think we'll ever see him back in an F1 car. Daniil Ricciardo, Australian from not too far away from where I live here in Lantzelin, is featured in this video a number of times. Here's one of those instances. Daniil, Kvyat and he came together at turn 3 in Baku in 2019. Daniil inadvertently reversed into Daniil, wiping both of them out of the race. But afterwards in the TV media pen, Daniil was very quick to approach the Russian driver to apologise for his unusual error. And that sort of thing goes a long way when it comes to relations in Formula 1. Still on the subject of Daniil Ricciardo, Daniil was very quick to approach Oscar Piastri on his second win in Azerbaijan in 2024. Obviously a fellow Australian, and Daniil had been nothing but supportive for the young driver, despite the fact that Oscar took Daniil's seat at McLaren. Just on the broad subject of respect, I see quite a bit of it at the track these days. I think it might be perhaps a more professional and more congenial atmosphere than perhaps in years gone by, although competitively, everybody is out to gain an edge. Lando Norris, next up, thought he was going to have his first win in Russia, but rain late in the race brought all his plans unstuck. Now, I watched Lando sit in his car for some minutes after that race, and it was heartbreaking to watch. Clearly he was devastated, but a great show of respect from him went to congratulate Lewis Hamilton on his win. He could have very easily avoided all that attention and walked straight into the FIA garage. Hats off to Lando. I mentioned Daniil Ricciardo would be featured a number of times. Here's another example. Daniil respecting his team in Singapore the night that he knew was his last Formula 1 drive. He didn't say anything. He could have, but he chose to respect the team's wishes for some bizarre reason. They did not want it confirmed. He danced around it a lot, and in the end, he walked out of that paddock, knowing full well it was his last race with the Visa Cash App Racing Bulls, and almost certainly his last race in Formula 1. F1 and the FIA showed great respect to Jules Bianchi after they retired his number 17 for future use forever. Jules Bianchi died some months after crashing at this point here on the Suzuka track in 2014. That number has been shelved indefinitely. On the subject of drivers passing away at Formula 1 races, a lot of the drivers, and in particular Pierre Gasly, make a point every year of going up to the spot where Anthoine Hubert crashed at Spa in 2019. Pierre lays flowers every year at that site, and last year a number of other drivers joined with him as a show of respect. And still on that subject, last year at Imola, Sebastian Vettel led a number of the drivers out to the Senna Memorial to pay their respects on the 30th anniversary of Ayrton's death. F1 drivers sometimes get police escorts into the track, and I witnessed a great show of respect from Carlos Sainz at Kota in 2023, when after he'd parked his car in the car park outside the paddock, went over to one of those officers who'd been involved in that escort and thanked him personally. Now, it's not often drivers go out and help clean up a circuit, but I was floored in 2021 when I found out that Sebastian Vettel was across the other side of the track from the media centre picking up rubbish in the main grandstand. There was no media invited. It was not a publicity stunt. It was just Seb, his trainer, his manager, and a couple of fans going row to row in the stand, picking up as much rubbish as they could gather. I fluked coming across this. One of the German publications said, Kim, you want me to go and take a long lens and go and have a look out there at the grandstand? And some of you will say, oh, that was him doing a publicity stunt. I got to tell you, it was not. I often spotted Seb picking up rubbish unannounced while he was going about his duties in the paddock. I have a lot of time for Sebastian. I love his company and I love the way he thinks, but that for me was a very respectful moment to go and clean up after the British patrons. When it comes to respect, the Japanese fans are grade A, Olympic quality, 5-star. It always amazes me on the Thursday for the pit lane walk, you've got hundreds and hundreds of fans, and all that separates them from the garages are these traffic cones with plastic rods that run across. I'm not sure you could get away with that in a place like, say, Monza, where the crowds are huge and they're just so excitable. And one other thing about those Japanese fans, and it floors me when I see this, after the race, they will stay back in the grandstands and watch a replay on the screens. They get to see the race twice. Hark back to 2021, last race of the year. Max Verstappen winning that final race and the championship. Lewis, gutted, disappointed, still had the grace to go and congratulate Max on his win at a time when a lot of other competitive athletes might have just shunned that winner. And still on Lewis Hamilton, well, his father actually, this was a moment that I think touched the world when his dad Anthony consoled Isack Hadjar moments after he had crashed during the formation lap at this year's Australian Grand Prix opener. I had a chat with Anthony in the paddock in China and I asked him about that, and the gist of our conversation was, how can we let a kid like that just go and not offer some support? He did that and won the hearts of millions. Brad Pitt showed great respect for the Ferrari team when at the end of last season, when Ferrari were out on the track doing their end-of-year shot, Brad and his co-star Damson came out to thank them all personally, posed for a few selfies with the team, dropped in for one photo and then left the team to be for their own end-of-year picture. Of course, Brad was relying on the generosity of all of the teams to make his movie a standout. It's still to be released. It comes out mid-year. But certainly he won a lot of respect from the Ferrari crew for doing that. My final respectful moment involves Sebastian Vettel and Lewis Hamilton. It was in the 2018 Bahrain Grand Prix. Lewis was questioned about swearing in the car. He was under pressure. He made some comment about another driver and was pressured about it by a reporter.
You used the word "head" after the race concerning Max Verstappen and the overtake and the contact. Is that correct?
Forced to defend himself, Seb saved him from that, jumped in and had this to say.
So I don't think it's justified to give us this kind of questions and making up a story out of nothing if we're just racing.
He stood up for his rival, and that's not something that a lot of drivers would bother doing. It touched me, and I imagine it may well have touched you. These are some of the many respectful moments that I've witnessed in my time as an F1 photographer. Now, before you go, please hit the like button and subscribe, and for a whole lot of extra content and merchandise, this is where you need to look. Thanks for watching, and stay passionate. Yes, that's the audio, good.